Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I hope today finds you safe and healthy. My name is Kimberly Weisul, and I'm an editor-at-large at Inc. I'll be your moderator for today's National Small Business Town Hall, the fifth in a series of weekly town halls designed to help business owners get through the coronavirus crisis. At Inc., we are always looking for ways to support entrepreneurs, and one way we've been doing that is with our ongoing coverage of the stimulus packages and what they mean for business owners. I'm so pleased that today we're partnering with another champion of small business, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'll be joined by Neil Bradley, the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the Chamber. After my conversation with Neil, we'll be taking your questions, and I'll be introducing a panel of experts to help answer them. We generally get hundreds or even thousands of questions at these events, but we do have a moderator working behind the scenes to make sure the questions with the most likes get to the top of the queue. If you see a question that is similar to yours, please like it, and there will be a better chance that it will get answered than if you put in a fresh question with the same content. Even if we don't answer your particular question, we hope we'll be able to answer a similar one that will be helpful to you. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Comcast Business for underwriting today's town hall and the information we're bringing to you. For those of you who are not familiar with Neil Bradley, he has over 2 decades of experience working directly with high-level policymakers. At the Chamber, as the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer, he is responsible for aligning the Chamber's overall policy priorities and advocacy efforts. Welcome, Neil. Good to be speaking with you again.
Kimberly, good to see you and great to be speaking with you again.
Right. So, Neil, quite a lot has happened since last week. As we know, the cornerstone of the government's stimulus plan for small businesses, the Paycheck Protection Plan, ran out of money less than 2 weeks after it was put into effect. Now Congress has approved a new bill to kind of re-up some additional funds for that program. What's in that bill?
Well, this bill, it's sitting at the White House now, awaiting the president's signature, will soon be law. It has a replenishment of both the PPP and the EIDL programs. For the PPP program, it's an additional $310 billion for loans to be made by financial institutions. Of that 310, 250 goes out just the way it did before. The additional 60 is set aside for certain lending institutions, particularly smaller banks, credit unions, CDFIs, and minority-serving financial institutions. On the EIDL side, there's another $10 billion for those EIDL cash grants that we've talked about. Those are those grants up to $10,000, and an additional $50 billion to support loans.
So one of the experiences that we've had with these programs is that after the legislation is passed, the rules change. So do we think that this additional money is going to be dispersed basically according to the same rules as the first slug of money, or are there changes?
Well, there are no changes in the statute, so the law hasn't changed. All the eligibility with that. You know, it's true, however, that the SBA and Treasury continue to refine the rules almost sometimes on a daily basis. In fact, they issued new regulations that have to deal with, for example, how banks use promissory notes just a few hours ago this Friday morning. Also new guidance with respect to companies returning funds, etc. So the guidance will continue to come out, but from the statutory legal standpoint, it's still the same program.
So can you talk just a little bit? I have not had time to read this. As you said, it just came out this morning, but I know that you're on top of it. In terms of that forgiveness, what do people need to know? Even if it's not a huge change, what's the latest?
Well, so we've all been reading the press stories about some businesses who took out funds and it turned out that they didn't need them. And so we've heard of some businesses already voluntarily returning. What this new regulation says is that if you applied for a loan, you thought you might need it, it turns out you really don't, and you're not hurting, then you can return that loan amount back to the government. If you do so quickly, they're not going to come after you questioning whether you actually needed the loan or not. Remember, when you fill out that PPP form and you sign it, you attest that you need these funds, that's critical for your ability to continue to operate. And so if it turns out that you took one of those loans and you don't need it, this is kind of that safe harbor window for people to return that money. The good news is that money will go back into the pot and it can go out to help more small businesses who really need the assistance.
Yeah. So again, on the forgiveness part of this, right, which is one of the really unusual features of the Paycheck Protection Program, there's a lot of worry about how will I actually get this loan forgiven? Who's going to make that final call for the business owner? They think they've done everything right. They brought back their employees. Who's going to actually decide, and how will it work that they get the loan forgiven?
So there are two things that we're really looking for here. One is we think that the government will continue to provide guidance, just as they provided initial guidance about how you qualified for the loan and what you could use it for. We expect, as we get further into this process, more guidance from the government about the particulars, because I know people have lots of questions about how the loan forgiveness operates. From a practical standpoint, what you're going to do is you're going to go back to that lender who gave you that loan, and you're going to present documents that show what you spent during the 8 weeks after origination. You're going to show them documents that include your employee head count and the wages that you paid. And on the basis of that documents, the lender will approve your loan forgiveness.
Right. So it's going to be up to the bank at the end of the day.
It's up to the bank, but I don't want to confuse people by saying it's a discretionary process. There are pretty tight rules written in the law, and there are even going to be tighter rules in the regulations that implement it. So it's not going to be a question of, can you convince your bank that you did the right thing or not? It's going to be a kind of a black and white test. You're going to go in and say, yes, this is what I spent on payroll. Yes, this is my employee head count. Therefore, I qualify for this amount of loan forgiveness.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that clarification. Really much appreciated. A number of banks have said they have such a big backlog of applications that even with more money available, they're not going to take new applications. If you haven't applied yet for one of these loans and you believe that you need one for your business, is it worth the effort? Should you still apply?
Well, everyone will make their own decision, but I'll tell you what I would do in this situation. What I would do in this situation is, yeah, I would apply for the loan. It's not that complicated. The form is not that difficult to fill out. I do think that we're going to quickly run through this $310 billion. If you just look at the loans that we think are already pending at banks, the total volume of them and the amount available, it's going to go pretty quickly. Now, we can't guarantee that Congress is going to replenish the money, but if they do and you need this money, you're going to want to go ahead and be in line to get that next tranche of funds. So my advice to you is if you need the money, go ahead and apply. Hopefully you'll get in within this tranche of money, but if you don't, maybe there'll be another tranche and hopefully that'll be there to support you.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned, there's been some money set aside for smaller lending institutions and those that serve underrepresented communities. Practically speaking, is this going to help solve the problem of a lot of this money going to companies that would not popularly be considered small, even if they fit the guidelines? Is that going to help here?
Well, I think it'll certainly help make sure that some of these underserved communities, when it comes to financial institutions, have a better opportunity. If small businesses in those communities have a better opportunity to get loans. Now, the parameters, what qualifies for a loan, that hasn't changed. And there's not a set aside for particular types of businesses. I think a lot of people were expecting that there would be, some amount of money that was set aside for minority or women-owned business, for example. That did not occur. Instead, what they did was they set aside money for these lending institutions. Now, we just know that those institutions happen to serve a lot of the minority women-owned community. So that will definitely help. And a lot of them are really small employers, by the way. So that'll really help in that respect. But it's not like there's a particular set aside based on the ownership or size of the company.
So given that there is money set aside just for these lending institutions, are your odds of getting a loan better if you go to one of them, if you go to a smaller institution rather to a national one that we already know to be swamped with applications?
Potentially. Now, so I think there's a caveat there, though, right? A lender still has to be approved to participate in the program. So if you happen to be in a community, maybe you have a fairly small lending institution or credit union, or you have a CDFI in your area, one of the things that you might consider doing is calling that small bank, calling that credit union, calling that CDFI, ask them if they're participating. If they're participating, part of the loans that they make will count towards this $60 billion that's set aside. And that might be a great place and a great avenue to get in. But don't just assume that just because they're a small institution or a CDFI that they've been approved to make loans. I happened to talk to some this morning. They're in the process of requesting approval. They just haven't got it yet so they can make loans. So those are the things you're going to want to check on.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to ask you a question that we are getting all the time at Inc., and I'm sure you're hearing it a lot too. What if I have applied for a PPP loan? I don't know the status of the application. Is there a way I can find out? And should I apply elsewhere? What should I do?
So let me break that in two. First, you're going to want to talk to the lending institution that you applied with, and you're going to want to be very specific in the questions that you ask. These terminologies, we all get confused by this. You hear the word approved and you think, well, that must mean final approval. No. So the first thing that has to happen is the bank's accepting your application. They're like, yep, we're taking this. We're going to take a look at it. The next step is the bank is approving. But that doesn't mean you have a loan yet. That doesn't mean the government's approved. So once the financial institution approves that, they have to make an application on your behalf to the SBA through something called the E-Trans system. When the SBA approves it, then they assign a loan number unique to you that goes back to the bank. When that loan number comes in, or that E-Tran number, you've been approved and there's money there for you, and you can actually start the signing process and getting the disbursement. So if you go ask what your status is and they say you've been approved, ask which stage of the process you're in so that you're really clear in your mind where you're at. With respect to applying at multiple institutions, as we've said before, there's no prohibition against doing that. The only prohibition is you can't take more than one loan. That is a big no-no here. So if you're going to multiple institutions, we know lots of people have done that. That's something that you'll have to decide whether it's worth the time, the expense, and if the lenders are comfortable with. But whatever happens, make sure you don't take more than one loan.
Great. You had mentioned, if there is more money for PPP, if you may just want to be in line. Treasury has said there will be no more money, but everything is changing so quickly. This has been referred to as sort of a bridge package. What do we think a next round of stimulus might look like? And would we expect to see anything in there specifically for smaller businesses?
I do think we'll see something for smaller businesses. It could be a replenishment of the PPP program. It could be a modified PPP program. Now, remember, it was just over 2.5 weeks ago that we began this discussion of replenishing PPP. So, in some ways it feels like yesterday, in other ways it feels like an eternity ago, but that was roughly 2.5 weeks ago. If you plot out 2.5 weeks from now, Congress is likely to be back. They're going to debate some of these issues. I think we could see any number of scenarios, but the one thing I'm pretty confident about is that there's going to be some type of additional support for small businesses. If it's the PPP program, I'd want to be in line already to make sure I can get that aid.
Another program that looks like it's sort of coming back is the EIDL program, right, which had also run out of money. This is another one where the rules have changed. At one point, you were supposed to be able to get sort of $10,000 grant off the top. Now it's $1,000 per employee. Right now, the application, last I checked, is not up with the SBA. What should we expect here? They too have a backlog. Should folks try to apply when that application comes back up?
I would. So, here's what we expect. The president's going to sign the bill. The budget folks in the government do their magic called apportionment. When that happens, then the SBA can reopen the program. They've told us informally they're going to do that as quickly as they can. When that happens and you can begin to apply, you should apply. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get money. And remember, the EIDL program is particularly slow. And to your point about that $10,000 being reduced to $1,000 per employee, I don't anticipate that changing. There's so much demand that I think they're probably going to stick to that rule of $1,000 per employee up to $10,000.
So if you are somehow managed to get both a PPP and an EIDL loan, does that affect your forgiveness at all on the PPP?
It does not, except for that idle grant. So if you got that grant, let's say you got 5 employees, you got a $5,000 idle grant, that will offset against your loan forgiveness in the PPP program. So just remember that, and always, the good advice is, remember, you're borrowing 2 different loans for 2 different purposes. And so PPP is a great program to help with payroll because of the loan forgiveness aspect of it. Idle then can be used for, capital expenses, other ongoing expenses that maybe you don't have enough money from the PPP to cover.
One of the things we haven't spoken a lot about, because in some cases they conflict with the PPP, are these tax credits and deferrals that are available to small business owners. But I think they're important because they can potentially help you with your cash flow right now. So let's start maybe with the employee retention tax credit, which you cannot get if you get a PPP. Can you tell us how that works?
Yeah, and I think we have a handy slide here that we'll make sure that's available to folks. So employee retention tax credit, very simply, $5,000 per employee. It's done as a tax credit model. When you receive that, it offsets, it's a refundable credit. There are 2 different rules here. If you have more than 100 employees, it's only for when you're paying employees who are not providing services. If you have fewer than 100 employees, it applies irrespective of whether the employee is providing services or not. And remember, the 2 ways to qualify: you are partially or fully shut down because of a governmental order, like the stay-in-place orders, or you've had a 50% drop in gross receipts in a quarter compared to last year.
And I think the other thing that people should know about is the payroll tax deferment. What does that allow?
So as you know, when you sign a check to pay your employees, you turn around and you send a check to Uncle Sam for those payroll taxes. Part of it is the employee portion, part of it's the employer portion. You can defer your payment of the employer portion, that's 6.2%. You can defer it between now and the end of this year. If you do that, you'll repay the government, repay Social Security, 50% at the end of 2021, 50% at the end of 2022. And again, Kimberly, to your excellent point, if you've taken the PPP program, you can't do the payroll tax deferment.
Right. I just want to clarify, is it that you can't do the payroll tax deferral at all, or that you can't do it after you're forgiven?
Well, that's a great question, and there's no clarity on that. And so, now we're talking about, it's bad enough when you're dealing with one government agency. Now we're dealing with 2. We got the IRS over here administering one program and the SBA administering the other one. We'll see what the final rules say. My expectation is that what it'll end up happening is, if you have your PPP loan forgiven, from then on out, you can't continue to defer payroll taxes.
Good. Okay. Glad to just throw in some confusion there, right? Okay. Thank you very much for talking us through all this confusing stuff and latest developments. I'd like to turn now to our panelists. We have a great lineup to help today answer our questions. I'm going to start with Michelle Sourie Robinson. She is the president and CEO of the Michigan Minority Development Center. Michelle, many banks are saying that even with this additional money, they won't be taking loan applications. Where are you recommending that business owners go if they want a PPP loan and they haven't had an application approved yet?
Absolutely. So some of that I think Neil just hit on, but I think we have to start looking at that entire list of lenders. And what I would strongly recommend is that you look at some of the non-traditional sources. Many of our business owners that banked with larger banks found that they were stuck in the queue. But at the same time, we've had great success with CDFIs, community-based lenders, and quite frankly, some of the non-banks. PayPal, QuickBooks, many of those online resources have now come into the SBA lending program and are offering those services. So we do strongly recommend that people look at some of those non-traditional sources.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to introduce Sarah Jennings. She's been a panelist with us before, and she is CPA and Director and Principal of accounting firm Maynard Costerisan. Sarah, we've had quite a bit of requests for more guidance for people who are self-employed or who get income off of 1099s. And it does look like they're in a bit of a confusing situation. They are eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program, but they also appear to be eligible for unemployment. So if their business has cratered, how should they be thinking about this?
Right, that's a great question. And I think, as you mentioned when you were speaking with Neil earlier, there was a lot of just muddiness around all of it, right? When you get granted a couple new things. So big picture, I think across all of these programs, we have to remember that you can't get benefit for the same thing multiple times. That's not ever going to be the goal. So if you apply for unemployment because you are hopeful to get in this next round of the PPP program, that's fine. You just have to withdraw from the unemployment program once you receive the funding from the Paycheck Protection Program. Again, just trying to eliminate double dipping.
Okay, excellent. That's great advice. Thank you. Also with us is Bridget Weston. She is the acting CEO of the SCORE Association. Welcome back, Bridget.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah. So we're hearing a lot of worry about rent right now. So how are you advising business owners who are not sure they're going to be able to make that payment on May 1st?
Sure, great question. We're seeing a lot of that with our business mentors as well. First of all, like Neil said, we would still encourage people to get in the queue. Quick reminder that the EIDL loans can be used for those fixed costs like rent, so apply for that. The form is easier. And the PPP can include interest on rent, so just take that into consideration and speak with someone, an advisor or a mentor about that. But really, we are encouraging our small business owners who have rent to negotiate with their landlord. Many landlords out there are struggling too and would prefer to work with their existing tenants than find new ones today. So what we're suggesting is reach out to your landlord as early as possible and work out a payment plan. And what does that look like? You can have rent reduction and ask for a significant reduction. 25% is not too much to ask for, and negotiate in good faith with your landlord. You might also consider rent deferral, deferring a portion that you're required to pay back at a later time, which would mean either in a lump sum or increasing subsequent payments. You also might switch from, especially if you're in retail, from a base rate to a percentage rate, which would be a percentage of your monthly sales volume. So those are things, if you go to your landlord and have ideas and specific ways that you want to work with them and are comfortable paying back, suggesting solutions in writing is the best way to go. And then when you do get that agreement with your landlord, again, make sure that it is in writing so that you are covered and make sure you are protected in the long term. And again, this is something you can look at the various plans and work with a SCORE mentor based on what funds and expenses you have.
Great, Bridget, thank you very much. Next, I'd like to welcome Eugene Cornelius Jr. After 20 years with the SBA, he is now the Senior Director, Center for Regional Economics and California Center at the Milken Institute. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So all business owners have to, at some point, start thinking about reopening. And it's looking to be a very tricky situation. We have businesses in Georgia now saying that even though they're allowed to reopen, they don't think it's safe. And since they'd have so few customers willing to shop, it's not worth it. What are the things that businesses need to consider as they think about eventually reopening?
The first thing you need to look at is who is your customer and how do you provide that service to the customer? And if it is something that is person to person intense, then you have to look at how do you adapt your environment to create a safe environment for you, for not only your employees, but for your customers. The thing you want to look at more importantly, when you look at coming back into the market is your current supply chain, not only on how you receive your supplies, but how are your supplies going out? Who are your customers? What is the logistics of that? Because if you're in Georgia and you're opening up, but they're in a neighboring state that is not opening up, will you be able to get your just-in-time supplies and needs to open your business at full capacity? Then I would break down my customers. Who are my critical customers and who are the customers that fit in this wave, be it a first wave, second wave of opening up as the president and the White House have put out the guidelines for opening up? Who fits in those categories? And how do I move my resources to adjust in those categories, to adjust to that client base, to maximize what I can get in revenue exchange with them. I think it's important that we do that SWOT analysis, that we look at what are the strengths we have available now in this environment, what are our weaknesses, what are the real opportunities? We know some of the threats, but what are the real opportunities? You may not want to come on board full force at the beginning. You may want to phase it in based on those logistical issues, based on those safety environmental issues, and based on your customer base and where the logistics are and where they are.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to go to our first audience question. We have had requests, can we email out answers to the questions that don't get asked? I'm afraid we can't. We are up to more than 900 questions right now. However, we do look at them afterward. We also look at the most asked, and we use that to inform our coverage on Inc.com. We use it to write questions for the next go round. So please keep asking the questions. We'll do the best we can with them. So the first one comes from Jack, and I think this is for Sarah or for Neil. Prior to securing PPP funding, I let my 2 employees go. One is making more on unemployment and the other found another job, so neither can be rehired. If I hire new employees, will they count toward the 75% payroll, or to qualify for forgiveness, must I rehire the same employees? Sarah, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had this question a lot, and from our perspective, the statute doesn't care if it's Sally or Joe. It cares about an FTE count. So we just need to keep that in mind. You're looking at FTE and numbers of employees, not necessarily who. We've had a lot of clients that have had that same challenge, and they're struggling getting people to come back because of all those unemployment increases and expansions in the program. So, but our guidance is, as long as you maintain your FTE count, it doesn't matter who that is.
So this question is interesting to me also because it says that one person is on unemployment and can't be rehired. So that's a little tricky because if you're on unemployment, generally you have to certify that you're available for work. So Bridget, do you have any advice on how a business owner can handle this situation where someone is making more on unemployment than they would if they came back to work?
It is really a tricky situation. And again, the information is changing daily. What we would recommend is simply, try to figure out how, what the best need is for your business today and try to bring in that FTE for your business, regardless of if it is that existing business owner or the new one. That would be the best next step to take.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a question disturbingly about fraud. A number of people are seeing offers for loans that they're not sure if they're genuine or not. How do you know that you're applying somewhere that can actually get you the funds? I'm going to start with Bridget again, because we've talked about this before about how to know that an offer is real and not fraudulent, but I would love everyone's perspective on this.
Sure. Thank you so much. And there are unfortunately a lot of gimmicks and people out there trying to take advantage. One of the things we would recommend is to, connect with either that lending institution or the SBA directly and make sure that if the information you're giving is verified through their portal. The government will never ask you for that personal information and solicit out to you. You are the one that needs to be going to that portal, that application, and applying there. So verify the source of the information. Do not give the private information if someone emailed you asking for a social security number or income or anything like that. It would only be through the protected portals.
Yeah. Thank you. And Michelle, is this an issue that you're seeing your members deal with as well?
Absolutely. And for that reason, I would even go a step further and say to simply go to SBA.gov and look at the list of approved lenders. We have found some diamonds there in that some of the non-traditional sources, people like equipment lease providers, also have the ability to provide you with SBA loans. And many of them who were taken aback by some of the fraud out there have opened their doors because they were able to move most of their customers through in the first round of funding. So they have now opened their doors and they are open to helping small businesses, even though they don't accept deposits and they're not looking for you to become a permanent customer. So please do go to SBA.gov and actually look at that site for all of the approved lenders to ensure that you're not involved in any fraudulent activity.
Excellent. Thank you. Gina, I know you must have seen fraud, not just now, but also in your days dealing with Katrina. What are you advising people to do to avoid this? Oops. I think I just lost Jean. Sarah, could you?
No, I'm here. I'm
sorry.
sorry.
All right. Excellent. Come back, please.
Okay.
Help us with fraud.
I would agree with most of the panel, but the first thing I would do is I would go to my bank. The first step I would do is go directly to my bank and deal with them. And if they are not a participant in SBA, then get a referral from them to someone that participates with SBA. That way you keep control of who you're interacting with, and you're dealing with people who know you. Because not only does SBA have participants, but all participants don't make all the same loans. So you want to make sure that you know you're dealing with someone that knows you. And if anyone solicits to you for a loan, beware. SBA does not reach out to individuals to make loans. You have to come to us, to SBA. I'm still saying us. I recently left SBA, but you have to be careful. You should go to your bank. You should go and deal with people you know and people who know you.
Got it. Thank you very much. We have a number of questions about brand new companies. This person asked, what resources are out there for brand new companies? I founded a new company in April 2020 in response to COVID. So what is out there for new startups? Okay, this is a tough one because I think this person maybe didn't expect to be in distress if they saw an opportunity from this crisis. Neil, what is out there for brand new companies? Can they apply for this?
The loan programs that we've been talking about, for example, PPP, requires that you be in existence on February 15th of this year. So if you just opened your company in April, that's a program that's not going to be available to you. Some of the tax programs, you might potentially, but man, you'd really want to have your ducks in a row if you opened up in April and you're trying to claim a tax deferral at the end of the month. So I think it's going to be difficult if you're that new of a business to be able to avail yourself of any of these programs. If you were at the beginning of the year, these programs really are designed to help for you. So if you started in January, don't assume that you don't qualify. In fact, you will qualify for most of them. If it's April, I'd be a little more suspect.
Yeah, Michelle?
I would simply add to that. Today, the governor of Michigan actually rolled out a new program that really talked about just this thing, people that had begun businesses this year, but also people that had perhaps accepted a position at a job and were now needing assistance because they could no longer take that job. So the other thing I would say is, in addition to looking at these federal options, certainly look within your state to see if they have addressed this as well.
Excellent. Thank you. This is a question, again, about unemployment. I just want to ask Sarah's opinion on it and her perspective about how not just hiring people back to make your numbers, but what if you actually need the same people, right? What if you've spent a lot of time training them or they have relationships with customers? This says, what do you do if you're located in a higher unemployment benefit state and your employees are making more money or close to the same money with the additional $600 and don't want to return to work after you've received the CARES Act? What's the negotiation there? How do you get people back?
Well, I think it's important for employers to communicate with their employees a couple things. One, it's not just an election that I don't feel like going to work. You still have to say, I can't get employment. So there is that. They should just say, okay, I'll come back to work. but it is a real challenge. We've had some employers that are actually detailing out letters reminding their employees that they had laid off for a period of time. We've got the Paycheck Protection Program. We're going to rehire you. You have active employment and your responsibility is X, because they want to remind their employees of that. The other thing that we've definitely seen people consider is some sort of a hazard pay bonus, because they are thinking about their employees who are a little bit nervous to come back to work during this time. So they're saying, okay, we understand you're putting your family, yourself at risk. We want to bump you up a little bit because we understand that. So there are a few things to think about.
Excellent, thank you. This is a question about potential reopening that I'd like Jean to take. It says, when my business reopens, it will open with social distancing, and that means that the normal 32 staff members will become 6. They've already laid off a third of those staff because they don't expect to need them when we reopen with limited clients. How can I pay back my PPP loan when I get it? Because I don't know if I will need all my staff. I think this just shows how quickly things are changing, right? People apply for the loan thinking they're going to be able to bring everyone back, and all of a sudden 8 weeks looks very different. So what should this person do?
Well, this person really should look at how he or she wants to accept that fund. The funds for the PPP are clear. They are for employment. They are for the maintaining of employment due to this crisis. So when you have forgiveness in your calculation, if you're not just taking the loan because you need the cash flow and you're willing to pay the interest and you're willing to deal with the duration of the loan outside of forgiveness, you need to take that into consideration. So I would say to that person, if you're going down to that level, you need to calculate the ongoing debt above and beyond the FTE count and wage count of the 6 employees that you maintain and the employees you let go, because that will not be forgiven.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Sarah, this is another question about sort of 1099s and independent contractors. This person asks, assuming I get a PPP loan soon as a sole proprietor, can it go to pay for my own payroll for March and early April when I lost all work? Can the funds be used for retroactive payments? There might be some work available now for me. So what if I get the loan and then I do get some work? All right. So when this person applied, they had no work. Now they think there's work coming. What does that mean for their PPP loan?
Right. So the self-employment kind of regulations or standards were just issued last week, I believe, or the week prior, after the application process was actually up. And they're saying it's still an 8-week period. That part doesn't change. So you still get the loan and you have to look at that 8-week period of funding. There are some pretty specific, and Neil, I don't know if you want to go into further, but there are some pretty specific items that you have to look at, what is allowable and what isn't allowable, but it's mirroring what your application was. So if you think about your Schedule C from 2019 and you look at what that would be for the next 8 weeks, that's kind of what you're going for. You're taking 8 of the 52 weeks for the year, and that's what you're going to pay yourself over the next 8 weeks.
Okay. Neil, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I just said it's exactly right. And I think the forgiveness, particularly for the independent contractors 1099s, we're not exactly sure how that's going to work. Like a lot of this, that's going to need further guidance, because remember, the only thing you're replacing there is wages. But amidst all this talk of what can be forgiven, I think it's really important to also remember what happens if it's not forgiven. So if it's not forgiven, remember, you don't make any payments for 6 months after the loan is originated. It is a 1% interest rate, and the term of the loan is 2 years. And so people get very caught up in maximizing the forgiveness, and that's important. But remember, we're also talking about a really generous loan term if you have parts of this loan that aren't forgiven. And you ought to keep that in mind, too, as you're factoring all these trade-offs.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a question from a business owner who was really ahead of things here with their EIDL loan. So this person has actually received a PPP loan and it's covering their payroll because they have 0 revenue right now. They applied for an EIDL loan earlier and they have an application number, but they did not apply specifically for the coronavirus EIDL loan, right? So they applied for an EIDL loan like way back when, but they don't have any of the money yet. Do they need to start over and apply for the coronavirus version of this one? Or is maybe their original application still in pay? That's kind of complicated. I know you don't have a crystal ball to know what's going on with their original application, but if someone applied for an EIDL really early before the rules kind of changed, what should they do? Neil, let's start to give that.
Well, hopefully they will have heard something already if they applied that long ago, right? And so if you haven't, my best advice would be you probably have a number. You should have a number for when you filed that original application. You should reach out to the SBA and you should find out the status of that. It's possible that you got kicked out when the system restarted. It's also possible that you didn't and you're still in queue. And so that's what I would just go back to them and ask. If you don't have that number or you never got that number, then you may have not actually fully kind of completed that process. And so that's the thing I would look for. That's where I would start. Okay,
great. Thank you very much.
Eugene may have something on this too, given his background.
Yeah, I would say you have to look at the date of your application. If your application date is before January 30th of this year, then you may want to reapply. You may want to take that number, contact SBA, and apply for the grant participation part of that loan. I would have to really understand how long he or she has applied for this loan, because SBA may be slow, but they're not that slow. So when it comes to the disaster loans, so I would say that person needs to contact his disaster assistance communicator, which is probably at the end of that number on that sheet, and find out if he or she was in the time frame of the application for the grant.
Excellent, thank you. Neil, we have some confusion about the time frame for forgiveness with that June 26th date plus the 8 weeks. So can you just clarify that for people?
Sure, and it is confusing. So the way I like to think about this is it is a two-part test for loan forgiveness. The first part is when you're trying to maximize your total potential loan forgiveness, and you calculate your total possible maximum loan forgiveness by adding up what you spend in that 8 weeks after you receive that loan. That's that payroll, the rent, utilities, interest on your mortgage. You add up all of those things. Remember, 75% of it has to be for payroll. So if it's 150,000, but only 75,000 was for payroll, then your maximum loan forgiveness is 100,000. Okay, now we figured out your maximum. Now we're going to figure out if that amount gets reduced, and it can be reduced because you've reduced your employee headcount. So you've laid off individuals and you haven't brought them back. And if you haven't restored them by June 30th, then you're going to have a proportional reduction, and let's say that $100,000 of maximum loan forgiveness. Remember, there's a second part to that too. If you've brought people back, but you've cut their pay, you've cut overall payroll by more than 25%, you're also going to have a reduction in that loan forgiveness. So I think if you think about them as two steps, step one, maximize during the 8 weeks. Step two, make sure that I'm not having a reduction because of that employee headcount issue. You can work your way through calculating your loan forgiveness.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. Michelle, I'm wondering, you're talking to businesses about reopening, about how they should think about this. We have a question here. Are there any protocols or any advice you could give for returning to work for a business that requires person-to-person contact? I think this is some of the toughest businesses because they had to close first, and they could be some of the slowest to reopen. So what would you say to them?
Absolutely. I would say first, you have to look at the federal guidelines that have been issued around how to create a safe workplace. In addition, most states, I've been involved with at least 3 now, that are really going and trying to make this a very simple process for businesses to understand what those distancing guidelines are, but to also understand how to perhaps set up your organization so that you may do so. Here, where I live, we have many manufacturers, and they have literally had to resituate their assembly assembly lines to ensure that they are having the 6 feet in distance, but they're also having cleaning protocols. So what I would strongly advise is that you actually look first at the federal guidelines, because the guidelines that were issued about a week ago for reopening the nation, I think, have some very great tools within them. But in addition to that, I do believe state governments working with their health authorities are helping to really try to hone in on providing better guidance to employers within the state.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I have another sort of common question here about people who are not having any luck going through their existing banking relationships. This person says their bank won't help them with the PPP. They've called other local banks. They're not getting any help there. They're interested in applying with a fintech company. They're interested in PayPal. They are not sure, without an employee, do they consider themselves a sole proprietor or an eligible self-employed individual? And they're also wondering, how do they know if other fintech companies are legit? So maybe just start with Sarah. Are they self-employed or are they a sole proprietor?
So if you have a business and you get a K-1, so you're one of the owners and you have anything on the line that says guaranteed payment or self-employment income, you're applying on the part of the organization. Sorry, I'm talking with my hands. If you have a, showing the buckets on the K-1, if you have a another sort of a business, then you are applying really as a self-employed individual. So those are kind of the two categories. And I think relating to the company, I think, again, what I believe many of the panelists said earlier, if you go back to the SBA website and you make sure that they're approved through there, I completely agree also with what's been said. It is about relationships in your lending and your trusted advisor. So if you can get referrals rather than just blindly going somewhere, that's always better.
Yeah. So Michelle, can you just talk about that SBA website? Because it may have changed, but last I saw, you're looking geographically. So if you're looking for a fintech lender, how do you do that? Because they're loaning or trying to all over the country, the ones that are busy.
Right. And I will tell you what they've done. They have grouped together. There's actually a link for SBA lenders. And what you want to do is look literally, they will have them grouped to Kimberly's point by geography, but they have actually started to list some of those that are non-banks. It includes everything from Intuit, QuickBooks, and some of them do have their own requirements, as if, you know, they want you to have had a prior relationship with them. But PayPal, Square, several of those organizations have come together to be able to assist, in particular, small businesses during this time, and those who they may have a banking relationship, but for many small businesses, what I have found through this process with this pandemic is that they are simply, even though they have a banking relationship, they're simply not being given the attention that they deserve by their bankers. So they might need to look at alternative sources. The other thing I would add here, Kimberly, is we had the question here in the last week or so from many of our business owners that felt that they were in that situation as to how we would advise them. So we did reach out to the SBA to talk about that, applying to multiple lenders, and what does that really mean? I think Neil touched on it briefly earlier, but you'll basically have the ability, if you do say, I'm in line at my bank, I'm in the queue, but I'm just not sure the banker is going to be able to push me through so that I get into the SBA system. You might have been approved by the bank, gone through that underwriting process, but you still need to be placed in that SBA system. What the SBA has simply said to us is you can't have multiple EIN numbers accepted through that system. So you can certainly apply, because you don't know which lender or lenders might be able to push you through into the SBA system. But then as soon as you receive that E-Trans loan number, you need to take the opportunity to then go back and remove your applications at the other institutions.
Excellent. Thank you. A question about the EIDL program, which is going to get more money, but the question is it still oversubscribed? And so will the SBA be accepting new applications? If so, are there caps on the amounts they will be lending? So Neil, maybe if you don't know exactly if they're going to be accepting new applications, maybe Eugene, with his experience at the SBA, could also respond.
Yes. I think we run a high likelihood that they're going to be oversubscribed again. They are reopening. We don't know how they're going to handle that oversubscription, but the volume is just so large that even with the funding, both for PPP and EIDL, is probably not going to match the demand that we currently have. So Eugene may have some specifics about how he thinks they might portion that, but that's what we're looking at.
No, I think you're right on point, Neil. I think that's exactly where we are, where they are in SBA. I do know that SBA tends to look at where the disaster is laid out and where the impact is more important. So they will look down at the use of funds and where geographically those funds are the most impactful. So that will play into it as well.
Okay. Thank you. And Sarah, this person heard that the rules for PPP forgiveness may be changed by Congress. Is that something that you've heard, or Neil, that you've heard? It's a little scary.
It is scary. We're not hearing that they're changing. We're hearing they're being clarified, continually clarified. So there are still some things that we are excited for when that clarification comes. Part of it is on timing, whether the for retirement, for example, whether it is when you pay the retirement payment, but in that 8-week period, or if you have to allocate that out 8 or 52 weeks divided by 8 of what your normal retirement contribution would be. There are some questions still around transportation. Which is part of a utilities expense in the act? What is included in transportation? So again, I don't think anything's changing. I think it's just being clarified.
Okay. Neil, are you expecting changes?
Well, yeah, the one thing about Congress is they always reserve the right to change their mind at any time for any reason. So I'm not going to rule out changes. We're not hearing of a lot of changes. I would say that if we were to see changes, I think they're going to be along the lines of that when this program was set up, June 30th and 8 weeks and those things made a lot of sense, and that maybe that doesn't quite match the situation that we're in, and so that it might become a little bit more generous in some of those statutory terms. But Sarah's right. Most of this is going to come through the regulatory guidance. I would not be overly concerned that Congress is going to change the rules and make it harder for you. If they're going to change the rules, if anything, it's likely to make it easier for you.
And this is another one that has to do with that timing and the forgiveness. This is a person who owns a private preschool, and they were approved for a PPP loan last week. She was told she would have to reinstate her teachers the following day for it to be forgivable, but they're under mandated closure through June 29th, so she has no meaningful work for those preschool teachers until a week before they eventually open. She was told to keep applying for the loan and then withdrawing it until she's within a week of opening. Does that make sense for her? What can she do? Yeah, what should she do? Because June 29th, yeah.
So first, let's remember that it's counterintuitive, but the purpose of the PPP program is to have small businesses continue to pay their employees even if those employees aren't working. And so there's no requirement that the employee actually be working. Congress intended this to be an alternative to unemployment insurance. So they want you to keep paying your employees even if they don't come back. Now, as to that suggestion that you would rescind the loan and then apply again, that to me is a heck of a risky bet, because you've got the loan now, and I would really worry that you're not going to get it the next time because you're going to be at the back of the line again. So from where I sit, that's bad advice.
Yeah, I see other people on the panel just shaking their heads.
Totally bad advice. Neil said that very well. Exactly.
All right. Sarah, are you seeing people trying things like this? It's so hard to get a loan through once. It seems a little bit crazy.
Yeah, we aren't seeing anybody. I haven't seen anybody actually do it, but we certainly have had that exact same question. And, we keep saying the same thing and reiterating what Neil had said. You have to remember big picture. The Paycheck Protection Program was to keep them. It's very frustrating for many of our small business owners to say, well, I'm paying them to do nothing. And we've gotten a lot of calls, and it's almost more like counseling, because it is very frustrating to think that you're paying these people to sit at home or to be underutilized, but that's the point of the program. And you're really saving yourself from trying to rehire new people, retrain everybody in 8 or 10 weeks. So if you think about it from that perspective, it's a little bit easier. But
yes, Eugene.
I think that if that is a problem for you, one of the things is to look at how do you use those employees now? Do you prepare a strategic plan for the future? Do you roll out a plan for reopening and what you're going to do? This is the time to do the behind the scenes work. If you want to put those people to work and you feel uncomfortable about them sitting at home doing nothing, this is the time to use it to strategize and to forecast where you're going to be and how you're going to reopen and what your plans are in engaging your client base coming back to your operations. I would focus on that.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. It's sort of a nuts and bolts question, I think, for Sarah. It says, if I choose to give employees bonuses during the 8-week period, would that be considered normal payroll and eligible to be forgiven?
So overall, yes, it is normal payroll. It's part of your gross payroll. I would be careful about an extreme bonus. So I think that there will be, and this is just a gut reaction from a conservative accountant, I think there will be some scrutiny on how big those bonuses are going to be in the end. You don't want to just inflate it all so that you can use up that 75% and get forgiven the whole thing. That's not the intent. So again, go back to the intent of the Paycheck Protection Program. Also, as we talked about earlier, there are some people looking at hazard pay. So there is some support for giving a bit of a bonus right now because we know people are in hard times and things like that. So just keep in mind the intent of the program and don't get too greedy.
Yeah. Neil, do you think that there's going to be increased scrutiny on things such as bonuses, as Sarah mentioned?
I do, and I think that Sarah's advice is spot on here. And so in the same way that we've all read stories about folks getting money who we didn't think should have, there are going to be stories about people who are trying to, I just got asked a question the other day, I'm just going to pull all the pay forward into those 8 weeks, and then I'm just not going to pay them for 2 months after that. Don't do that. That is abusing the system. If Sarah's exactly right, you're going to get caught on that, and that's how you get in trouble in this situation. Play it straight. There's ways to increase for hazard pay. There's appropriate bonuses, but don't get too cute.
All right, thank you very much. I thought I was ending on an optimistic question, but thank you for bringing that dose of reality back here. As usual, I want to offer a big thank you to Neil Bradley and the team at the U.S. Chambers of Commerce, to all my colleagues at Inc. who have worked to make these town halls possible, and of course, our panelists. Thank you so much to Michelle Sourie Robinson. She's the president and CEO of the Michigan Minority Supplier Development Council. Bridget Weston, the acting CEO of the SCORE Association, Eugene Cornelius Jr., the Senior Director, Center for Regional Economics and California Center at the Milken Institute, and Sarah Jennings, a CPA and Director and Principal of accounting firm Maynard Costerisan. I'd also like to thank Comcast Business for their support in underwriting today's town hall and the crucial information we were able to bring you today. We will be continuing to follow these issues closely at Inc.com, so please check Inc.com for more updates and coverage. As always, it's a pleasure for all of us to be able to do everything we can to support small businesses. Thank you for spending an hour with us. I hope you all stay healthy and enjoy your weekends, and we hope to see you back here next week. Thank you.